All right, so in the previous lesson, we learned a little bit about reducers. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how to use it and hopefully understand them a whole lot better. So let's get into it. Let's look at how we can use it. First of all, what we could do is import a new hook, which is going to be UseReducer. And let's say we're going to use the UseReducer instead of useState. So I'm just going to delete the useState in a second. Just hold on. But if you have a look over here, we can say UseReducer, like so. And now remember that we pass in two parameters in here. The first parameter is the reducer that we want to use. And that is going to be the to-dos reducer. Now we're going to create that in a minute. And the second parameter is going to be the initial value of this piece of state. Now I previously set it to this, and I'm going to take that initial value again. So I'm going to take this as the initial value like so. And I remove useState because we don't need that anymore. So let's also remove this useState import as well. So when we first load the application, this is going to be our initial to-dos. Okay, so just like the useState hook, this UseReducer hook will return an array, and in that array, we will receive two parameters again. So I'm going to say const, and then open up an array, and inside this array, the first parameter is going to be state itself, and again, I'll just call it to-dos, like so. And for the second parameter, it's going to be, remember, a function called dispatch. Okay, so this is the context state, just like we saw it on useStateHook, and this is the dispatch function, which will help us to send an action to this reducer. Then this reducer function will get the action, and it will manipulate this piece of state, just like we did with these functions. But with the reducer function, we're going to do the same thing that we did in here, but we will centralize this state manipulation in the reducer function. So it'll reduce all of our different functions that we have to manipulate the state. So in our case right now, it's just these two functions. But anyway, it'll reduce it into a single function. You get it, right? Cool. Okay, so now let's create this to-dos reducer function in here. So let's say const, and it's going to be called to-dos reducer, and set it equal to a function. Now, of course, you remember reducer takes in those two parameters, the state first and then the action. And inside this reducer, remember we need to check what the action type is, because whenever we dispatch an action, it just goes to this reducer, and we need to check the type of that action before we actually manipulate the state. So let's say switch. I want to use the switch statement. And then we want to look at the action.type. That could be either add to do or remove to do. But we'll do a case for each one. So case, and that is going to be add to do. And it's kind of a community convention to keep these in capitals. So inside this, we're going to return a new updated state, and this new value is going to be the new array of to-dos. So remember, our to-dos array is going to look like this, right? So when we want to take the current value of the to-dos, which is represented by state inside this reducer, this represents the to-dos array. So what we're going to do is we're going to spread out all the different objects that's currently inside the to-dos array. So we're going to grab all of those and put them inside this new array. And then we want to add a new one to this array. So I'm going to open up a set of curly braces in here, and this will be new to-do object. So we need two properties in here. We need a text, and that's going to be on the action object that we pass in, which will be the new to-do that we want to add. And then we also need an ID for this to-do. Okay, so I'm going to say text, and we're going to get it from action.text and ID. Now before we use this math random function right here, we did that over here. So why don't we just copy this from here and paste it. All right, so now we have our first case done. Okay, so if we were to dispatch an action with this type add to do, this will add a new object that we want to add to the state in here. Then it will return this new data, and this state will be returned. And then we'll pass it down as a value over here, and then all the components consume in this context. So we'll see that updated state in a minute. Okay, so that's the first case. Now the second case is going to be remove to do. So let's just do that. I'm going to say case. And again, in capitals, I'm going to say remove to do. And inside here, we're going to return a new value again. And that new value is going to be a filtered array, just like we did over here. Now we said to do's dot filter, and actually I'll just grab everything from here. I'm going to copy this and paste it over here, like so. Now I want to shorten this a little bit. We can remove this return statement and this one, like so. Okay, so this time we're going to say state.filter, because remember, state represents the to-dos object. It represents this piece of state. So we're going to say state.filter, and for each item in that array, we reference the item as to do. If the to-do ID is not equal to the action.id, because when we send an action of this type, remove to do, we will send an ID property of the to-do that we want to remove as payload. So now we're going to return true if those two IDs are not the same. And if they are the same, then it's going to return false and remove that item from the array. So that is it. Now, we also need a default case. So I'm going to say default, and I'm just going to return state in here like so. And there you go. There's our reducer. So we've created the reducer function. Now we can remove all these functions over here because we no longer use them inside this component. We use the to-dos reducer instead. So what we need to do now is remove these functions from value props and instead just pass down dispatch like that. So now in this way, we're just passing the dispatch function in here. Okay, so if I save this, then nothing is going to work in the application because we're trying to consume a context and using the different functions from that context in the different components. If we look into the to-do list component, we're trying to get add to do and remove to do functions, but they don't exist in this context. Crazy, huh? No, I know you follow me. We don't have that anymore because we just have the dispatch method. So what I'd like to do here is instead get the dispatch from here. So I'll remove these functions and instead I'm going to say dispatch. Now this dispatch function is going to dispatch an action, and that action will be the object. Okay, so when we want to add a new to-do, instead of using this add to do function, we're going to use dispatch. Let's remove it from here. Then in here, we just need to pass an action that we want to dispatch, and that action is going to have a type. And in this case, we want to add a to-do. So add to-do. And then we also need to pass a payload that is going to be the to-do that we want to add. So I'm going to say text, and the text will be this to-do state, and this is what we type into the input field. Okay, so this is going to be the payload. So we've got the dispatch method from the context, and we're using that to add a to-do. So why don't we now do the same for removing a to-do? So instead of the remove to-do function, now we want to dispatch an action. So let's delete this and instead say dispatch. Then this time an action type is going to be remove to-do. And then the payload is going to be an ID, which will be just the to-do ID, like so. And again, key and value are the same, so we can remove this one. So now we're dispatching this type of action. Okay, so we've pretty much done. I hope that's pretty clear to you. But let's save all this first and see how it works in the browser. Okay, so let me just refresh, and you can see that we have those initial to-dos to begin with. And if I say new to-do and press enter, it still works. It gets added to the to-dos, and I'll remove this, and that also works. So add something in here and press enter, remove it again. Okay, see, so that's great, don't you think? Okay, it's the basics of how to use the UseReducers hook. And it'll reduce all of our different functions which interact with a state into one single function. It's efficient, it's clear, it's clean. I think you'll find that it's much easier as you expand your application because now all of your different state logic is in one place inside this to-dos reducer. And it makes this context file very clean as well, because we're not having to do all of that manipulation right there. All right, so this is almost done now. I just want to show you one more tiny thing, and that's, well, I'm going to carry this reducer into its own file, and just to demonstrate the file structure of the reducer function. But I'm going to show you that in the next video. So stick around. I'll see you in the next lesson.